winter wind cut through the streets of New York City like a blade that night. Snow fell heavy over Manhattan, blanketing the dark alleys and iron fire escapes in silent white. The city that never slept was quieter than usual, as if even the chaos knew to bow its head when the Moretti name was whispered. Inside a fortified brownstone mansion in the Upper East Side, 10-year-old Lorenzo Moretti Jr. sat alone in his room. The space was enormous, larger than most family apartments in the city. Mahogany furniture, silk curtains, a king-sized bed he never wanted, shelves lined with toys he never touched. Everything a child could dream of. Everything except warmth. Outside his window, armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Black SUVs idled at the gate. Security cameras blinked red in the darkness. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress, and Lorenzo was its loneliest prisoner. His father, Dante Moretti, was one of the most feared men on the East Coast, a Mafia boss whose empire stretched from shipping docks to Wall Street boardrooms. His word was law. His silence was a death sentence. Men twice his size trembled when he entered a room, but with his son, Dante was something else entirely. Desperate. He had tried everything to reach the boy. Expensive gifts arrived weekly. A purebred Arabian horse was delivered to their private estate upstate. Lorenzo looked at it once and walked away. A rare parrot from South America was brought in a golden cage. The boy didn't even glance up from his book. Pedigree dogs, German shepherds, golden retrievers, even a Siberian husky puppy with crystal blue eyes. All rejected. All returned. Dante's associates whispered among themselves. Some said the boy was broken. Others said he was cursed. A few dared to suggest he wasn't his father's son at all, but Dante silenced them all with a single look. He knew the truth. Lorenzo wasn't broken. He was buried. Buried beneath years of witnessing things no child should see. Buried under the weight of a name that carried blood and fear. The boy had watched men kneel and beg for mercy. He had seen his father's cold eyes decide their fate with a nod. He had heard screams from the basement that his mother pretended not to hear. He had learned, at an age when other children learned to ride bikes, that love was a weakness and trust was a liability. So Lorenzo stopped feeling. It was safer that way. His mother, Isabella Moretti, tried in her own way. She was a former opera singer, beautiful and refined, now trapped in a gilded cage of her own. She would sit beside Lorenzo at dinner, her diamond necklace glittering under the chandelier, and ask him about his day. He would answer in monosyllables. She would smile sadly and pour herself another glass of wine. The Moretti household was filled with people, guards, housekeepers, chefs, drivers, but it echoed with emptiness. On this particular December night, the family gathered for dinner in the formal dining room. The table could seat 20. Only 3 sat. Dante at the head, Isabella to his right, Lorenzo at the far end, as if distance could protect him from the tension that always hung in the air like smoke. The chef had prepared a feast. Roasted duck, truffle risotto, imported wine. Lorenzo ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Dante watched his son with eyes that had intimidated senators and terrified rivals, but now held only quiet pain. He had built an empire so his family would never know suffering, and yet, his son was suffering in ways money couldn't fix. After dinner, Lorenzo retreated to his room without a word. Dante remained at the table long after the plates were cleared, staring at the empty chair where his son had sat. Isabella placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He's just a child, Dante. He needs time." Dante's jaw tightened. He's had time. 10 years. And every day he slips further away. Maybe he needs something different. Something you can't buy. Dante looked up at his wife, her words settling like stones in his chest. But what could he give that he hadn't already tried? What existed beyond his power and wealth? Across the city, in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, Emily Parker was getting ready for her night shift. At 26, she had learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, instant coffee, and sheer determination. She worked as a waitress at Girasol, an upscale Italian restaurant in Midtown, a restaurant secretly owned by the Moretti family, though most employees didn't know it. Emily had been working there for 8 months. The pay was decent, the tips were better, and the management never asked questions about her past, which was exactly what she needed. She had come to New York 2 years ago with nothing but a bus ticket and a promise to herself that she would never go back to the small Ohio town where she'd been raised in foster care. She tied her dark hair back, put on her worn coat, and stepped out into the freezing night. The subway ride to Manhattan was long and cold. She spent it reviewing her mental budget. Rent was due in a week. Student loan payment, still behind. Electricity bill. Groceries. The numbers never quite added up, but somehow she always made it work. When Emily arrived at Girasole, the dinner rush was already underway. The restaurant was elegant. White tablecloths, soft lighting, waiters in crisp black vests. It catered to Manhattan's elite. Politicians, businessmen, and occasionally, though always in private rooms, members of the Moretti family. Emily had only seen Dante Moretti once, from a distance. He had come in late one night with several men in expensive suits. The manager had cleared the back room immediately. Emily had been told to take their order and ask no questions. She remembered his eyes, dark, calculating, and somehow sad. Tonight was different. Tonight the restaurant was busy but normal. Emily moved between tables with practiced efficiency, smiling at customers, refilling wine glasses, memorizing orders without writing them down. She was good at her job, invisible when she needed to be, present when required. It was a skill she'd learned early in life. Her shift ended at midnight. The snow had turned to freezing rain. Emily pulled her thin coat tighter and headed toward the subway, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. That's when she heard it, a small, pitiful whimper coming from the alley beside the restaurant. Emily paused. Common sense told her to keep walking. New York alleys at midnight were not places to investigate strange noises. But something in that sound, something fragile and desperate, Errol pulled at her. She turned into the alley, her phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. And there, behind a dumpster, shivering in the sleet, was a puppy. It was tiny, maybe 8 weeks old. Mixed breed, matted brown and white fur. One ear flopped over, ribs showing through its soaked coat. Its eyes looked up at Emily with a trust she didn't deserve, considering how the world had clearly treated it so far. Emily's heart broke instantly. She knelt down, ignoring the puddles soaking through her jeans. "Hey there, little one. What are you doing out here?" The puppy tried to stand but stumbled. It was shaking so violently Emily could hear its tiny teeth chattering. Without hesitation, she scooped the puppy up and tucked it inside her coat against her chest. It was so cold it felt like holding ice. But within seconds, she could feel its small heart beating frantically against her own. "I've got you," she whispered. "You're okay now." Emily had no plan. No money for a vet, no space in her tiny apartment for a dog. But she knew she couldn't leave it there to die. Not tonight, not ever. She hurried back to the restaurant's back entrance. The kitchen staff were cleaning up. Emily slipped inside, the puppy still hidden in her coat. You forget something?" Marco, one of the line cooks, called out. "Just need to grab my tip money from the back, left it in my locker." She moved quickly through the hallway toward the employee room. But as she passed the private dining area, she heard voices. Emily froze. The door to the back room was slightly open. Through the gap, she could see Dante Moretti seated at a table with several men. They were speaking in low, intense tones. Business. The kind of business Emily knew better than to hear. She started to back away carefully, but the puppy chose that moment to let out a small, weak bark. The conversation inside stopped. Emily's blood turned to ice. Footsteps approached the door. She had nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide. The puppy squirmed in her coat and she held it tighter, her heart hammering. The door opened fully. A large man in a dark suit stepped out, one of Dante's bodyguards. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. But then he saw Emily, just a waitress, young, scared, holding something against her chest. "What are you doing here?" His voice was granite. I work here. I was just..." Dante Moretti appeared behind his guard. Even in the dim hallway light, his presence was overwhelming. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly tailored suit, dark hair graying at the temples, eyes that could cut through steel. He looked at Emily for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped to the small, wet nose poking out from her coat. "What is that?" he asked quietly. Emily's voice shook. "A puppy, sir. I found it outside, in the alley. It was freezing. I couldn't leave it." Dante stared at the small creature. Something flickered across his face, not anger, something else. Something almost like recognition. He turned to his guard. "Let her pass. Boss. I said let her pass." The guard stepped aside. Emily didn't wait for permission to be revoked. She hurried past them down the hallway and out into the night. As she disappeared into the darkness, Dante remained standing in the doorway watching her go. He didn't know why he'd let her leave. Didn't know why the sight of that small, helpless puppy had struck something deep in his chest. But he would remember her face. And he would remember the way she'd protected that animal with her own body, even when faced with men who made grown criminals weep. Something was shifting. He could feel it in his bones. The kind of shift that changed everything. Have you ever rescued something fragile and found it rescued you instead? What do you think will happen when Lorenzo meets this puppy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 2 where everything changes. Emily barely remembered the subway ride home. The puppy stayed tucked inside her coat, its shivering gradually subsiding as her body heat warmed it. She could feel its small heartbeat steadying against her ribs, a rhythm that somehow matched her own racing pulse. Her apartment in Queens was a fifth-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked all night. But it was hers. The first place she'd ever lived that felt like home, even if home was just 300 square feet and a bathroom with questionable plumbing. Inside, Emily finally let herself breathe. She set the puppy down gently on her worn couch and really looked at it for the first time under proper light. It was worse than she'd thought. The puppy was emaciated. Its fur was matted with mud and something darker, maybe old blood. One of its paws was swollen. Its eyes were crusty. But when it looked up at Emily, that small tail attempted a weak wag. "Oh, sweetheart," Emily whispered, kneeling down. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" She spent the next hour doing what she could. Warm water in a shallow bowl. The puppy drank desperately. A can of tuna mixed with rice. It ate like it had never seen food before. Emily used a damp towel to carefully clean its fur, whispering reassurances the whole time. The puppy never snapped or growled. It just watched her with those trusting eyes, as if it somehow knew she was the first kind thing that had happened to it in its short, brutal life. By 3 in the morning, the puppy was asleep in a nest of Emily's old sweaters, breathing steadily. Emily sat beside it, her back against the couch, too wired to sleep. She knew this was temporary. She couldn't afford a dog. She worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. Her landlord barely tolerated her, let alone a pet. She'd have to find it a shelter, a rescue organization, someone with resources to give it a real chance. But as she watched that small chest rise and fall, something fierce and protective awakened in her. Maybe just a few more days, just until it was stronger, just until she was ready to let go. Across the city, Lorenzo Moretti Jr. couldn't sleep either. He stood at his bedroom window, watching snow fall over the manicured gardens below. The grounds were lit by security lights that made the snow glow blue. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Lorenzo pressed his forehead against the cold glass. 10 years old, and he already understood the iron rules of his world. Trust no one. Show no weakness. Emotion was a target painted on your back. His father had never said these things directly, but Lorenzo had learned them anyway, through observation and silence. He had learned that the men who smiled widest at dinner were often found face down in the Hudson River a week later. He had learned that his mother's laughter was performed, not felt. He had learned that even family was a transaction. So when his father brought home those expensive animals, those perfect pedigreed creatures, Lorenzo saw them for what they were. Another test, another performance. Love me or love this thing I bought, his father seemed to say. Prove you can feel something. But Lorenzo couldn't, wouldn't. Because feeling meant caring, and caring meant losing, and losing meant pain he'd already experienced too many times. Better to be empty than broken. A soft knock on his door. Lorenzo didn't turn around. "Lorenzo?" His mother's voice, gentle and sad. "May I come in?" He didn't answer, but she entered anyway. Isabella Moretti moved like a ghost through her own home, beautiful and ethereal in her silk robe, a glass of wine perpetually in her hand. She stood beside him at the window, following his gaze to the empty gardens. "Your father is worried about you," she said quietly. Lorenzo said nothing. "He doesn't know how to reach you. He's trying in his way. By buying me things I don't want?" It was the most Lorenzo had said to her in weeks. Isabella's hand trembled slightly as she took a sip of wine. He doesn't know another language. Wealth and power, those are the only things he understands, the only things he has to give. Then maybe he has nothing I need. The words hung in the cold air between them. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, and Lorenzo saw something he wasn't supposed to see. His mother's pain. Real, and raw and terrible. But before he could speak again, she composed herself. The mask slipped back into place. She set her wine glass on his dresser and kissed the top of his head, her lips barely touching his hair. "Good night, my love. Perhaps tomorrow will be different." She left, and Lorenzo was alone again. The way he preferred. The way he'd trained himself to prefer. But her words echoed in his mind. Perhaps tomorrow will be different. He didn't believe it. Tomorrow was never different. Morning came gray and bitter cold. Emily called in sick to work, the first time she'd missed a shift in 8 months. She couldn't leave the puppy alone yet. Not when it was still so fragile. She found a small cardboard box and made a proper bed, used the last of her savings to buy puppy food, a collar, and basic supplies from the corner bodega. The owner, an elderly Dominican man named Luis, raised his eyebrows when he saw the puppy. "That's a street dog," he said, not unkindly. "Tough to keep alive." "I know," Emily replied, "but I have to try." Luis studied her for a moment, then added an extra can of food to her bag and waved away her attempt to pay for it. "For the dog. He's a fighter. I can see it in his eyes." Back at her apartment, Emily realized she needed a name. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the puppy in her lap, thinking, "What should I call you, huh?" The puppy licked her hand. "Something strong. Something that means you survived." She thought of her own childhood, the foster homes, the nights when she wasn't sure she'd make it through, the small acts of kindness from strangers that had kept her going. "Chance," she said finally, "because sometimes that's all we get, one chance to be saved." The puppy, Chance, looked up at her and wagged his tail. For the first time in longer than Emily could remember, she felt something shift in her chest, something like hope. That evening, Dante Moretti returned home earlier than usual. His wife was surprised to see him before midnight. His son didn't seem to notice at all. Dinner was quiet and tense as always. Lorenzo pushed food around his plate. Isabella made small talk that went nowhere. Dante watched them both with growing frustration. Halfway through the meal, he set down his fork with enough force to make Isabella flinch. "I'm done," he said quietly. Isabella and Lorenzo both looked up. "I've tried everything. Every gift. Every opportunity. I've given you a life others would kill for." He looked directly at his son. "And you give me nothing in return. Not even anger. Just nothing." Lorenzo met his father's gaze with empty eyes. "What do you want from me?" "Something. Anything. Proof that you're still human." The words landed like a slap. Isabella reached across the table toward Dante, but he pulled away. "You want to know what I think?" Lorenzo's voice was calm. Too calm for a 10-year-old. "I think you want me to be like those men who work for you. The ones who pretend to feel things so you'll keep them around. But I can't pretend. I'm not good at lying yet." The yet hung in the air like a death sentence. Dante stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the marble floor. For a moment, Emily thought he might shout, might finally break. But instead he simply walked out of the dining room, his footsteps echoing through the empty mansion. Lorenzo returned to his room. Isabella poured another glass of wine. And in Queens, Emily held a small puppy named Chance and wondered how she was going to make this work. She couldn't keep him. She knew that. Tomorrow she'd start calling rescue organizations. Tomorrow she'd find him a real home with people who had yards and resources and stability. But tonight, she let herself imagine. Imagine coming home to wagging tail. Imagine not being alone. Imagine having something to protect besides herself. Chance fell asleep in her arms, and Emily allowed herself to cry for the first time in months. Not from sadness, from something else. Something fragile and new. The next morning, Emily woke to a phone call from Girasole. "Emily, it's Marco. Mr. Moretti wants to see you." Her blood ran cold. "What?" "The boss, Dante Moretti. He's here at the restaurant. He asked for you specifically." "Why? What did I do?" "I don't know, but he doesn't like to wait. Get here soon." The line went dead. Emily's hands shook as she got dressed. She looked at Chance, still sleeping peacefully in his box. "I'll be back," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure it was true. The subway ride felt like descending into a nightmare. By the time Emily reached Girasole, her palms were sweating despite the December cold. The restaurant was closed. It was only 9 in the morning, but the door was unlocked. Emily stepped inside. Dante Moretti sat alone at a table in the center of the empty dining room. No guards visible, though Emily knew they were nearby. A single espresso cup in front of him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Emily sat, her heart hammering. Dante studied her for a long moment. You're afraid? Yes, sir. Good. Fear keeps people honest. He took a sip of espresso. The puppy you found, is it still alive? Emily blinked. Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. Yes, I took him home. He's recovering. What will you do with it? I'm looking for a rescue organization. Someone who can give him a proper home. Dante nodded slowly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Emily tensed, but he only pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Before you do that, I need you to bring him somewhere. Emily looked down at the card. An address in the Upper East Side. I don't understand, she said carefully. Dante stood, buttoning his jacket. You will. Be there at 3 o'clock today. Don't be late. He walked toward the door, then paused. Without turning around, he said, You saved something that was dying. That takes courage most people don't have, or compassion they can't afford. He glanced back at her. My son has neither. Perhaps you can show him the difference. Then he was gone, leaving Emily alone in the empty restaurant, holding a business card that felt like a lit fuse. What do you think Dante has planned? Will Emily bring Chance to meet Lorenzo? The collision of these three worlds is about to change everything. Hit subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 3. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. Emily stood outside the Moretti mansion at exactly 2:55, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Chance was tucked inside her coat again, warm and calm against her chest, completely unaware of the significance of this moment. The brownstone building towered before her. 4 stories of old money and older secrets, wrought iron gates, security cameras angling down from every corner. 2 men in black suits flanking the entrance, their eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the overcast winter sky. Emily had almost turned back 3 times on the subway ride here. This was insane. She was a waitress from Queens being summoned to a Mafia boss's home with a stray puppy. Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this was safe. But something in Dante Moretti's words had stayed with her. My son has neither. Perhaps you can show him the difference. There was a boy inside that fortress. A boy who was hurting in ways that money couldn't heal. Emily knew that kind of hurt. She'd carried it herself for years. At 3 o'clock exactly, the gate buzzed open without her having to press anything. She was being watched. Expected. One of the guards stepped forward. Miss Parker? Yes. Mr. Moretti is waiting. Follow me. The interior of the mansion was exactly what Emily had imagined and nothing like she'd expected. Yes, it was opulent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. But it was also cold, empty, like a museum where people happened to sleep. They walked through a grand foyer, past a dining room with a table that could seat an army, and up a curved staircase with mahogany railings. The guard stopped at a closed door on the 2nd floor. Inside, he said simply, then stepped back to his position at the top of the stairs. Emily took a breath, adjusted her grip on Chance, who was now awake and looking around with curious dark eyes. Then she knocked. Come in. Dante's voice quiet and controlled. Emily entered. The room was a study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk made of dark wood, leather chairs, a fireplace burning low, and standing by the window looking out over the frozen garden was Dante Moretti. He didn't turn around immediately. You brought it. Yes. His name is Chance. Chance. Dante seemed to taste the word. Appropriate. He finally turned to face her. In the daylight, without the restaurant's dim lighting, Emily could see the weight he carried. The lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the exhaustion that money and power couldn't hide. My son is in the next room, Dante said. He doesn't know you're here. He doesn't know about the dog. Mr. Moretti, I don't understand what you want from me. Dante walked to his desk and sat on the edge of it, his arms crossed. For 10 years, I've watched my son disappear. Not physically, emotionally. He's become a ghost. I've tried everything. Therapists, gifts, trips, schools. Nothing reaches him. Nothing matters to him. He paused, his jaw tightening. 3 nights ago, I saw you in that hallway. A young woman with nothing, risking her job, maybe her safety, to save something small and helpless. You didn't think about it. You just did it. Emily held Chance a little tighter. That's what Lorenzo needs to see, Dante continued. Not another expensive show. Not another performance. Something real. Something that has nothing to do with money or power or our name. You want me to give him the puppy? I want you to let him meet Chance. And I want you to be yourself. Not afraid of me. Not performing. Just human. Can you do that? Emily looked down at the small dog in her arms. Chance licked her chin, and she felt that fierce protectiveness surge again. If I think for 1 second that this will hurt him, the dog, or my son, either of them, something flickered in Dante's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Fair enough. He stood and walked to a connecting door Emily hadn't noticed. He knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for an answer. Lorenzo, come here, please. There was a long pause. Then footsteps. A boy appeared in the doorway. Lorenzo Moretti Jr. looked like a smaller, unfinished version of his father. Dark hair, sharp features. But where Dante's eyes held calculated intensity, Lorenzo's held absolutely nothing. They were empty, hollow. The eyes of someone who had learned to feel nothing because feeling everything was too dangerous. He looked at Emily without curiosity. Then his gaze dropped to Chance. And for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Lorenzo, this is Emily. She works at Girasoli. Emily, my son. Emily nodded. Hi, Lorenzo. The boy said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on Chance. Dante glanced at Emily, then back to his son. Emily found this puppy 3 nights ago, behind the restaurant. It was dying in the cold. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but Emily noticed his hands twitch slightly at his sides. Would you like to meet him? Emily asked softly. His name is Chance. No response. Lorenzo just stared. Emily had worked with enough traumatized kids in her foster care days to recognize the signs. This boy wasn't being stubborn or rude. He was protecting himself, afraid to want something, afraid to care about something that could be taken away. She made a decision. Without asking permission, Emily sat down on the floor right there in Dante's study. She settled Chance in her lap, letting him sniff around and explore. I found him behind a dumpster, she said conversationally, not looking at Lorenzo directly. He was soaking wet and shaking so hard I thought he might die before I even got him inside. I didn't plan to keep him. I live in a tiny apartment. I work all the time. I can barely take care of myself, honestly. Chance yawned and stretched, his small paws extending. But that first night when he finally fell asleep after eating, I realized something. It's not about whether you have enough. It's about whether you have anything at all to give. And sometimes the smallest thing, like warmth or food or just being there, that's everything to someone who's had nothing. Emily finally looked up at Lorenzo. He was still standing in the doorway, but his posture had shifted. He was leaning forward slightly, interested, despite himself. You want to sit down? Emily asked. He's very gentle. Lorenzo's eyes darted to his father. Dante gave the smallest nod. Slowly, as if approaching something that might vanish, Lorenzo walked into the room. He sat on the floor across from Emily, maintaining distance. Chance noticed the new person and immediately tried to stumble over to him, his small legs still unsteady. Lorenzo went rigid. It's okay, Emily said. He just wants to say hello. Chance reached Lorenzo and promptly sat on his lap, looking up at him with those trusting dark eyes and wagging tail. Lorenzo stared down at the puppy. His hands hovered in the air as if he'd forgotten how to touch things, how to be gentle, how to connect. Emily watched something extraordinary happen. A single tear rolled down Lorenzo's cheek, then another. Then the boy who felt nothing began to cry. He didn't make a sound, but tears streamed down his face as he finally, carefully placed his hands on Chance's small body. The puppy licked his fingers and wagged harder, and Lorenzo let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He's so small, Lorenzo whispered. He's so small, and he's not afraid of me. Emily's own eyes filled with tears. No, he's not, because he knows you won't hurt him. Lorenzo looked at her then, really looked at her. How do you know? Because people who have been hurt recognize each other. We see it in the eyes, and Chance sees the same thing I see when I look at you. What's that? Someone who's surviving. Someone who's been protecting themselves for so long they forgot what it feels like to be protected. Lorenzo's face crumpled. He pulled Chance against his chest and buried his face in the puppy's fur, his small shoulders shaking. Emily glanced up at Dante. The powerful Mafia boss was standing completely still, his hand pressed against his mouth, his eyes fixed on his son, and Emily saw what she suspected he'd never let anyone else see. a father watching his child feel something real for the first time in years. They stayed like that for several minutes. Lorenzo crying silently into Chance's fur, Emily sitting quietly nearby, Dante standing watch like a sentinel. Finally, Lorenzo looked up. His face was blotchy and wet, his eyes red. But they were no longer empty. Does he belong to me now? His voice was so quiet Emily almost didn't hear it. She looked at Chance, content and calm in Lorenzo's arms. She thought about her tiny apartment, her impossible schedule, her own loneliness, and she knew there was only one answer. Yes, Emily said. If you want him, if you promise to take care of him, I promise. Lorenzo said it like an oath, like a prayer. I promise I'll keep him safe. Then he's yours. Lorenzo looked at his father for the first time. Papa, can he stay? Dante's voice was rough with emotion he was struggling to contain. Yes, anything you need, anything he needs. Lorenzo nodded. Then he looked back at Emily. Will you teach me how to take care of him properly? I don't want to do it wrong. Emily smiled through her own tears. Of course, I'll help you. Whenever you want. I can come by after my shifts if... Tomorrow, Lorenzo said immediately. Come tomorrow. Dante stepped forward. Miss Parker will need to be compensated for her time, Lorenzo. I don't... Emily started to protest, but Dante cut her off with a look. You're teaching my son something invaluable. You will be paid. That's non-negotiable. Emily wanted to argue, but something in Dante's expression stopped her. This wasn't about money. This was about pride, about owing someone, about the only language he knew how to speak. Okay, she said quietly. Tomorrow. Lorenzo finally set Chance down gently on the floor. The puppy immediately began exploring the study, sniffing everything with intense concentration. Lorenzo watched him with an expression Emily had never seen on a child's face before. Pure, unguarded wonder. Thank you, Lorenzo said to Emily, for saving him, for bringing him here. You're welcome. No one's ever given me something that mattered before. The words hung in the air. Dante turned away, his shoulders tense. Emily reached out and gently squeezed Lorenzo's hand. Then I'm glad Chance found me that night. I think you two needed each other. A small smile, the first Emily had seen, appeared on Lorenzo's face. It transformed him, made him look like what he was supposed to be. A 10-year-old boy. Just a boy. Dante walked Emily to the door himself. At the threshold of the study, he stopped. Miss Parker. Yes? He looked back at his son, who was now lying on the floor, letting Chance climb over him. Both of them content. What you did today, there's no price I could pay that would equal it. But I will try. And from this moment forward, you are under Moretti protection. Whatever you need, whatever you face, you call me. He handed her a card with a single phone number on it. That's my personal line. Only 12 people in the world have it. Now you're 13. Emily took the card, understanding the weight of what he was offering. In Dante Moretti's world, protection was the highest currency. I didn't do this for protection, Mr. Moretti. I know. That's why you have it. As Emily left the mansion and walked back through the iron gates into the cold afternoon, she could still hear Lorenzo's laughter floating from an upstairs window. Real laughter. The sound of ice breaking. She smiled and pulled her coat tighter against the winter wind. Behind her, in that fortress of loneliness and power, a father watched his son play with a small rescue dog and allowed himself to hope for the first time in years. And in his arms, Lorenzo held Chance and whispered promises about tomorrow. Everything just changed. A simple act of kindness has cracked open something powerful. But in the Moretti world, nothing stays simple for long. What happens when the rest of the family learns about Emily? When the boy starts to heal, will his father's world allow it? Subscribe now, because Chapter 4 is the conclusion you won't believe. 3 months can change everything. By March, winter had begun to loosen its grip on New York City. Snow turned to slush, then to memory. And inside the Moretti mansion, something impossible was happening. Lorenzo Moretti Jr. was becoming a child again. Emily kept her promise. She visited 3 times a week after her shifts at Girasole, arriving at the mansion around midnight and staying until 2 or 3 in the morning. At first, she came to teach Lorenzo about dog care, feeding schedules, training basics, grooming, vet visits. But it quickly became more than that. Lorenzo would wait by the window for her arrival, Chance beside him, both of them eager and alert. He asked endless questions, not just about Chance, but about everything. What was it like to grow up without money? What did she do for fun? Did she have friends? Family? What were her dreams? Emily answered honestly. She told him about foster care, about learning to survive on nothing, about working 3 jobs to put herself through community college, about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if she'd ever be anything more than invisible. Lorenzo listened with an intensity that was almost painful. He was starving for reality, for someone who didn't perform or pretend or fear his last name. And slowly, carefully, he began to open up too. He told Emily about the basement where his father's men took people who betrayed the family, about the nightmares he had where everyone he touched turned cold and stopped moving, about learning at age 6 that trust was a weapon people used against you. "I thought if I didn't feel anything, they couldn't hurt me," Lorenzo said one night, chance asleep between them on the study floor. "But I was wrong. Not feeling anything hurts most of all." Emily looked at this 10-year-old boy with eyes older than they should be and saw herself at that age. Lost, alone, convinced that survival meant shutting down. "You're brave," she told him. "Braver than you know. Because you're choosing to feel again even though you know it's scary." Is it always scary? Sometimes. But it's also the only way to be happy. Lorenzo considered this. "Are you happy, Emily?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about her tiny apartment, her exhausting schedule, the student loan debt that never seemed to shrink, the loneliness that crept in during quiet moments. But then she thought about these nights, about watching Lorenzo transform from a hollow ghost into a real boy, about Chance's tail wagging whenever she arrived, about feeling needed, wanted, important. "I'm getting there," she said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm getting there." Dante watched all of this from a distance. He was a man used to controlling everything, but he knew better than to interfere with what was happening between his son and this young woman who'd stumbled into their lives. Instead, he did what he did best. He protected. Emily's rent was mysteriously paid 6 months in advance. Her student loans vanished overnight. When her apartment building suddenly became condemned due to safety violations, she found herself moved to a beautiful 1-bedroom in a secure building in the Upper West Side, closer to both the restaurant and the Moretti mansion. The apartment was in her name, legally purchased, completely hers. When Emily tried to refuse, Dante simply said, "My son needs you consistent and available." This achieves that. End of discussion. But Emily wasn't stupid. She knew what was happening. She was being absorbed into the Moretti orbit, protected, provided for. And that came with invisible chains. She went to Dante's study one evening before Lorenzo's lesson. "Mr. Moretti, I need to understand something." Dante looked up from his paperwork. "Go on. What do you expect from me? Long term? Because I can't be bought, and I won't become dependent on—" "I expect you to keep being exactly who you are," Dante interrupted. "Someone real, someone honest, someone who gives my son what I can't, which is a reason to stay soft in a world that demands hardness." Dante leaned back in his chair. "Lorenzo is my heir, Miss Parker. Eventually he will have to step into this world. He will have to make decisions that would break most people. He will have to carry weight that would crush normal men. Then why are you letting me undo all the armor he built up? Because armor without a heart inside is just an empty shell. It has no center, no core. It will crack under real pressure." Dante's eyes were intense. "I don't want my son to be empty. I want him to be strong. And real strength comes from having something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. You're talking about him like he's a soldier. He is. He was born one. That's the world he inherited." Dante's voice softened slightly. "But you're teaching him that being a soldier doesn't mean being a machine. And that's a lesson I never learned. I'm 53 years old, Miss Parker. I've built an empire. I've accumulated more power and wealth than most men dream of. And I am profoundly, devastatingly lonely." The admission hung in the air. Emily saw past the Mafia boss to the man underneath. Exhausted, isolated, desperate to give his son a different fate. "I don't want that for Lorenzo," Dante continued. "So whatever you're doing, teaching him to care, to trust, to feel, please keep doing it. And let me provide what I can provide. It's the only language I know." Emily nodded slowly. "Okay. But if I ever feel like this is hurting him instead of helping him, I'm gone. No matter what you offer me." "Fair enough." As spring progressed, the changes became impossible to ignore. Lorenzo started smiling. started laughing at genuinely funny things instead of politely at expected moments. He played with Chance in the garden, running and rolling in the grass, completely unself-conscious. He asked for chocolate ice cream instead of accepting whatever the chef prepared. He said no when he meant no and yes when he meant yes. He was becoming himself. Isabella noticed too. She watched her son's transformation with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. One evening, she approached Emily in the hallway. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me my son back." Emily saw the tears in the older woman's eyes, saw the years of watching Lorenzo disappear reflected there. "He was always there, Mrs. Moretti. He was just hidden. Perhaps, but you found him. That's more than his father and I could do." Isabella reached out and squeezed Emily's hand. Her grip was strong despite her delicate appearance. "Whatever you need from me, you have it, I mean that." But not everyone was happy about the changes. Dante's inner circle, the men who'd been with him for decades, who'd built the empire alongside him, watched Emily's growing influence with suspicion. Carlo Benedetti, Dante's second-in-command, finally voiced what others were thinking during a private meeting in late April. "Boss, with respect, the girl is a problem." Dante didn't look up from the documents he was reviewing. "Explain." "She's an outsider, unknown, unvetted, and your son has become attached to her. That's a vulnerability. If anyone wanted to hurt you, then they'd already be dead." Dante's voice was quiet and cold. "I've had Emily Parker watched since the moment she entered my home. I know where she goes, who she talks to, what she thinks about. She's clean, she's genuine, and she's the best thing that's happened to this family in years. But, Carlo," Dante finally looked up, "I've spent a decade watching my son die slowly, watching him become what we are, cold, calculating, empty, and I told myself it was necessary. That hardness was survival, that emotion was weakness." He stood and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Lorenzo was playing with Chance. "Then a 26-year-old waitress showed my son something I couldn't. That caring about something doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And humans are stronger than machines because they have something to lose." "That's exactly my point, boss. Something to lose means motivation, means purpose, means my son won't grow up to be a brilliant, successful monster who destroys everything he touches because he doesn't know how to love it." Dante turned back to Carlo. "Emily Parker stays. She is family now. Anyone who threatens her answers to me. Are we clear?" Carlo nodded slowly. "Clear, boss." But Dante knew the conversation was only the beginning. In his world, loyalty was complicated. Protection was expensive. And bringing someone new into the inner circle always came with risks. That night, he called Emily to his study. "I need to be honest with you about something." Emily sat down, concerned by his tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing yet. But my organization is concerned about your presence. They see you as a potential weakness." "A weakness?" "Lorenzo's attachment to you. The time you spend here. The access you have." Dante poured himself a drink. "In my world, anything someone loves is a target. And my son loves you." Emily's heart constricted. "Should I stop coming?" "No." Dante's answer was immediate and firm. "But you need to understand what you've become part of. You're not just Lorenzo's teacher anymore. You're under Moretti protection. That means you're also a Moretti in the eyes of our enemies. I never asked for that. I know. But that's what happens when you matter to someone who matters in this world." Dante sat across from her. "I'm telling you this because you deserve honesty. There will be people watching you now, interested in you. Some may approach you with offers, information, money. They'll want you to betray us. I would never. I know, but I need you to tell me if anyone approaches you, no matter how innocent it seems. Can you do that?" Emily nodded, her mind racing. This was the reality she'd been avoiding. She wasn't just helping a lonely boy anymore. She was entangled in something bigger and darker. "Mr. Moretti, what exactly do you do? I know you're connected, but what does that mean?" Dante studied her for a long moment. "It means I operate in the space between legal and illegal, between business and violence, between protection and extortion. I control shipping, real estate, waste management, unions. And yes, sometimes people get hurt, sometimes they disappear, sometimes I make decisions that keep me awake at night. And you want your son to inherit this. I want my son to survive in the world he was born into, but I also want him to be better than me, to make different choices, To find a way to transition this empire into something that doesn't require bloodshed. Dante's voice carried decades of weight. That's why you matter, Emily. You're showing him there's a different way to be strong. A way that doesn't destroy everything it touches. Emily absorbed this. I don't know if I can do what you're asking. You already are. That conversation stayed with Emily for days. She found herself looking over her shoulder more, noticing people who seemed to notice her, wondering if the man on the subway was just tired or watching her. But she kept coming back, kept working with Lorenzo, kept watching him grow and heal. Because at the end of the day, she couldn't abandon him. Not when he'd started trusting her. Not when he was finally becoming the child he deserved to be. By June, Lorenzo had changed so fundamentally that even strangers noticed. The private tutors Dante hired remarked on his engagement and curiosity. The household staff whispered about his laughter. Even Carlo had to admit the boy seemed happier, though he still didn't trust Emily. And then came the day that proved Emily's worth beyond any doubt. It was a Saturday in early July. Lorenzo was in the garden with Chance, now a healthy, energetic 6-month-old puppy. Emily was inside getting lemonade when she heard shouting. She ran to the window. 3 men in dark clothes had somehow breached the garden. They were approaching Lorenzo, who'd frozen in place. Chance was barking frantically. Emily didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crystal vase, and ran. By the time she reached the garden, Lorenzo's regular guards were already subduing 2 of the men. But the third had grabbed Lorenzo, a knife to the boy's throat. "Nobody move!" the man shouted. "I'll kill him! I swear I'll—" Emily threw the vase with all her strength. It struck the man's shoulder. He stumbled, the knife pulling away from Lorenzo's neck for just a second, just long enough for the guards to take him down. Lorenzo ran to Emily, shaking. Chance barked and jumped around them protectively. Emily wrapped her arms around the boy and held on tight. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." Dante arrived minutes later with a dozen more men. He surveyed the scene, the subdued intruders, his traumatized son, and Emily Parker standing between both with fierce protective eyes. That night, after Lorenzo finally fell asleep with Chance curled beside him, Dante called a meeting. Emily was summoned to his study. Carlo and 4 other high-ranking members of the organization were present. Dante stood at the head of the room. "Earlier today, there was an attempted kidnapping of my son. 3 men breached our security. They were from the Castellano family, a rival organization trying to force my hand in a territory dispute." He let that sink in. Then he looked directly at Emily. Emily Parker responded without hesitation. She put herself between an armed man and my son. She risked her own life without thinking twice. Dante turned to Carlo. "You wanted to know if she could be trusted, if she was really family. Now you know." Carlo nodded slowly, his earlier resistance gone. "Agreed, boss. From this day forward," Dante announced, "Emily Parker is under full Moretti protection. That means whatever my son loves, I protect. That includes Emily herself. Anyone who threatens her answers to me personally." He looked at Emily. "You saved my son's life today. There is no debt greater than that. Whatever you need, whatever you want, for the rest of your life, you have it." Emily felt the weight of every eye in the room. She thought about her tiny life 3 months ago, about finding a dying puppy behind a dumpster, about one act of kindness that had spiraled into this moment. "I don't want anything except Lorenzo's safety," she said quietly. "And maybe to keep being part of his life." Dante smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. "You already are. You're family now." And in that moment, Emily understood what that meant. Not just protection, not just wealth, but belonging, being part of something bigger than herself, having people who would defend her the way she defended Lorenzo. She'd spent her whole life invisible and alone. Not anymore. The following months brought new rhythms. Emily reduced her hours at Girasol but stayed on part-time. She needed to maintain some independence, some life outside the Moretti sphere. Dante understood and respected that. She continued working with Lorenzo 3 times a week, but now she also joined family dinners, helped Isabella plan events, became a fixture in the household rather than a visitor. Lorenzo flourished. By his 11th birthday in September, he was unrecognizable from the hollow ghost of a year ago. He laughed easily, hugged his mother, talked to his father about real things instead of empty pleasantries, and Chance was his constant companion, a reminder that love didn't have to hurt. One evening, Lorenzo asked Emily a question that had clearly been building for weeks. Will you always be here? They were in the garden, throwing a tennis ball for Chance. The summer sun was setting, painting everything gold. What do you mean? Emily asked. Will you stay? Part of our family? Or will you leave someday? Emily saw the fear in his eyes, the old terror returning, that everything good eventually disappears. She sat down on the grass and gestured for him to join her. Chance immediately climbed into both their laps, demanding attention. Lorenzo, I can't promise I'll always be physically here. Life is complicated, things change, but I can promise you this. You will always matter to me. Always. No matter where I am or what happens, you can call me. Talk to me. I will be there for you. But what if you get married, have kids, move away? Then you'll be part of that life too. Because you're my family now. That doesn't change. Lorenzo leaned against her shoulder. I was dead before you came. I didn't know it, but I was. You were surviving. There's a difference. But you showed me how to do more than survive. You showed me it's okay to care about things, even when it's scary. Even when you might lose them. Emily wrapped her arm around him. Your dad told me once that real strength comes from having something worth protecting. I think he's right. And you, Lorenzo Moretti Jr., are one of the strongest people I know. Because of Chance? Because you chose to open your heart again. That takes more courage than anything else. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies begin to glow in the deepening dusk. Chance fell asleep between them, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Inside the mansion, Dante watched from his study window. Isabella came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. She saved him, Isabella said softly. She saved all of us, Dante replied. And in that moment, the Mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear and power understood something he'd never quite grasped before. The most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or controlled or commanded. They could only be given freely, like a stray puppy on a cold night, like an act of kindness from a stranger, like love that asked for nothing in return. 3 years later, Lorenzo Moretti Jr. would stand at his father's side at a charity gala. He'd be 14 years old, composed and confident, speaking eloquently about animal rescue programs the Moretti Foundation was funding. Beside him would be a beautiful mixed-breed dog named Chance, now a therapy animal visiting children's hospitals across New York. Emily Parker would be in the audience, watching with pride as the boy she'd helped save grew into a young man who chose compassion over coldness. She'd be sitting with Isabella, both of them dabbing tears from their eyes. And Dante Moretti would catch Emily's eye across the room and mouth 2 simple words. Thank you. Because sometimes salvation comes in unexpected packages. Sometimes it arrives shivering behind a dumpster. Sometimes it's carried by a waitress who has nothing but gives everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that salvation doesn't just save one person. It saves everyone it touches. The Moretti Empire would continue. Business would remain business. But at its heart, now beat something different, something warmer, something that remembered that power without compassion is just another form of death. All because one woman couldn't walk past a dying puppy. All because one boy found the courage to smile. All because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can reshape an entire world. And that's where our story ends. But the truth it carries stays with us. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is care when the world tells us not to. Sometimes the smallest acts echo the loudest. If this story moved you, if you felt something real in these 4 chapters, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next emotional journey. Share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness still changes everything. Drop a comment telling us your thoughts and we read every single one. Until next time, remember, you never know when one small choice might save someone's entire world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. We'll see you in the next story.